Welcome to The Game. This is the show where we go play by play analyzing the game of politics. Today, we're going to be looking into the current pivots that President Trump did. Specifically, we're going to look at tariffs, where he's rolling back some of the tariffs on food and beverages, everything from coffee, beans, bananas. Also, we're going to be looking at high-skilled immigration. Recently, the Trump administration, Trump himself, in an interview, said that there's an importance on high-skilled visas, on attracting this talent. This comes months after he put a $100,000 fee on new applicants looking for H-1B visas. And lastly, the government has reopened, but we're going to be looking specifically at what are the strategies that the GOP are going to be taking ahead of the 2026 elections. What does this mean policy-wise? What does this mean around the topic of affordability? And joining me today to discuss these topics is Soledad Cedro. She's the managing director at Tactic Global, and also the former communications director for Mayor Suarez. Soledad, how are you today?
Very good. Thank you for the invitation, Wadi.
Great to have you back on. We also had Chad Love joining us from Washington, D.C. He is a Republican strategist and co-founder at Cornerstone Group International. Chad, here for the first time. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
All right, as we said, our first topic, we're going to be looking at the shift on food prices and affordability with Donald Trump, talking about the importance of these topics and how tariffs might be playing a role when it comes to affordability. So that I do want to start with you. The topic of tariffs have been, I would say, front and center this year, kind of on and off a little bit, but they were something that we heard during the campaign trail and something that Trump did from the beginning. There's been different reasons to why he said he's implemented tariffs, everything from bringing American jobs back to leveling the playing field. Again, we saw what he did in Europe a couple months ago, some of the deals coming out from the UK and the EU. But why specifically now do you think he's making this a little bit of a shift when it comes to food prices?
I think that the first year has been a readjustment year, right? Definitely, he recreated the global game here. There were a lot of things that were not working in favor of the U.S., and he's been quite aggressive on his strategy. But the resolution has been good. Like, we've seen the European Union, we've seen European countries putting money into military budget in a way that months ago would have been unthinkable. It was perceived as everybody else that it was the U.S. responsibility to pay for all these things. Well, in fact, why? Right? And a lot of things have changed. That being said, you need to readjust. If Trump is something and his administration style is something, I think it's a pragmatic. And some things were not working for Americans, like food prices on certain items going up. So they're simply readjusting. I think that this doesn't mean the fact that now he's not putting tariffs on certain products doesn't mean that his strategy on tariff didn't work. On the contrary, it means that what works will stay, and what is not working, they are not afraid of changing it. And I think that that's the smartest thing to do.
Yeah, and what's difficult sometimes is that many times policies, we do not see the impact of them immediately. But the problem is that the American people, I think, wants results immediately. So I think part of the shift might be, again, like you said, he's kind of reading the room on affordability. He's reading the room on these food prices. Chad, I want to go to you. This reversal from the administration, do you think businesses, what can businesses read into this? Are they able to say that this is going to be something stable, that the president will continue with this readjustment? Do other businesses can believe that they'll see readjustments in other places of tariffs? Or do you think this is just the president being somewhat temporary on these taxes? Will he go back to be a little bit more hardline on tariffs?
Look, I think everybody needs to pay attention to the White House's social media page and the memes, because that's really going to tell you the president's policies. I think if we saw the idea that right now President Trump is looking at beans, greens, potatoes, tomatoes as chilling out on as we get close to Thanksgiving is kind of funny. But in all seriousness, look, I think what we've seen from the very, very beginning when Trump put these tariffs on, it was a negotiation tactic. And so what he's basically said to everyone is that I'm using this as leverage to better America, to increase revenues for America. And we've seen that. And we've seen Trump use these tariffs again, as a tool to negotiate, but he also has reduced those tariffs. And so I think, again, what we're going to continue to see is that the president responding to the market environment and leveraging tariffs where he can to try to get better deals for America. And then once he feels like he has a better deal for America, then he'll reduce the tariffs.
Well, Ro, I want to talk a little bit about China, Soledad. The reality is that um, China is a big competitor, but they also are a consumer of our products. I would say one of their weaknesses, food products specifically, one of their weaknesses is that they can't grow everything that they need food wise. Obviously, they are also producers in many of these areas, but there have been that complaints from farmers here in the United States that they have been hurt by the tariffs because China has also placed tariffs at the same time that Donald Trump has. Donald Trump has talked about possibly sort of giving a check back to farmers. If I'm not mistaken, this is something that he did in his first term. In your opinion, how much of a pool are these industries making? In other words, how much are they lobbying to see a change in this space? Is this, in your opinion, something that, again, farmers will be able to rely on Donald Trump in this space? Is this something that shows that maybe those who warned that prices would go up were correct? Is sort of that free market argument something that administration is going to have to take in consideration a little bit more?
I think that the administration has been clearly negotiating at many levels. And yeah, it's true that there has been some complications, particularly when it comes to the agro industry and China. But it's also true that part of these negotiations, including other countries buying American products, specifically agricultural products, that they haven't been buying before. For example, Vietnam was the first country to negotiate with the U.S. A new tariff system after the U.K., which was more of a symbolic thing. Then the first real negotiation close was with Vietnam. Vietnam historically has not been a big buyer for American agricultural products, but in order to reach an agreement with what it means for the U.S. buying products that are manufactured in Vietnam, which is the main source of income that Vietnam has, because Vietnam has become the great manufacturer after a lot of sanctions came to China and so on. The U.S. requested them buying billions of dollars in agricultural products from the U.S. That created a huge market. And I'm just putting Vietnam as one example. This has been a global, massive negotiation. And I think that everything is starting to come into place. Will we need some readjustment? No doubt about that. Because obviously things sometimes are you test them, some things work, some things don't. And it's good that the administration is willing to readjust the things that don't work. But I don't think that the agricultural industry has been unfairly treated by this whole negotiation. I think that the administration had them in mind in the past and have them in mind right now. And they are trying to do what's best for America step by step.
So actually, I want to continue with you. You brought up Vietnam, but a lot of people talk about Latin America when it comes to this landscape, right? I talked about China earlier, that they are an immense competitor when it comes to factories, when it comes to the production of various products. Many people look to Latin America as a place where there might be a labor force that could possibly be trained or ready to go in this space. But also when we talk about agriculture, they can be big trade partners in this area. When we talk about coffee, in your opinion, is there an opportunity there? Have you seen movement already from countries in that space, or has that been slower than it should be?
I think that Latin America is the biggest opportunity that the U.S. has right now. Why? Because geographically, it's really convenient to do business. The cost of transportation coming from Latin America, it's a fraction of what it costs to bring things from Asia, for example. Two, because what you said, there's cheap labor. In many cases, it's skilled cheap labor. It's not just manufacturing that we're talking about, but we can think about technology. We can think about data centers. We can think about a lot of different industries. It's not just agricultural industry coming from Latin America. But the biggest problem has been a two-sided problem, and it has to do with politics. On the end of the United States, for decades, the United States has ignored absolutely the region, have not considered it as a region important in their geopolitical play. That's changing, and I think that that's a good thing. And on the Latin American side, it was very unstable. When you have like most of the countries in Latin America with leftist regimes nationalizing companies, it's very hard to do business with them. But now we've seen a shift in this sense. We've seen everything started with Argentina and with El Salvador. Those were the first two countries
Ecuador as well.
Yeah, that shifted. Then came Ecuador. Then Bolivia, we just seen it. We're seeing what's going on in Chile, that most probably we're going to have a change of regime. So now the geopolitical game is changing, and I think that if we have governments, we have solid democracies in Latin America that we can trust as Americans to be good partners, that's going to be a huge win-win for the U.S. and for Latin America.
Yeah, for a long time, the U.S. had the Monroe Doctrine, and it wasn't just a philosophy. It was very much something that they implemented, and they sought to, tie esos lazos en español. There's also an election coming up in Honduras, where Honduras for the first time had a socialist, self-declared socialist president. This is 4 years later. Now they're up on the ballot again. The Conservative Party is really making a shift there. There's Marco Rubio now, Secretary of State. So I think Latin America, when it comes to trade, is a big one. Chad, I want to move to you when it comes to big picture. If we zoom out, when it comes to this conversation of tariffs, there's also the Supreme Court that had or recently heard arguments. There were arguments against the president's power in this space. There's many people who believe that the Supreme Court is sympathetic to this criticism and that the administration might have to make any adjustments. Do you think the administration is getting ready for a possible negative ruling for the Supreme Court? Are they going to be looking to work with Congress, or are they exploring other mechanisms when it comes to tariffs and their power in that space?
I think right now, what the president's really focusing on is an America First agenda, and he's going to have his team work through these issues in the courts, as he's done on many other issues. As we've seen, we're on immigration, where we've had issues. We've seen the same thing around SNAP, where we've had the court intervene in terms of the president's actions. At the end of the day, what the American people really need to be excited about is the fact they have a president of the United States that's willing to go and fight for them. I mean, we even had people pushing back on the president designating some of these drug traffickers as terrorists and taking it to the streets to try to limit the amount of fentanyl coming in to this country. So I think when it comes to tariffs and it comes to the tariff policy in the United States, the focus really needs to be on, we got to have tariffs. We have to be able to raise revenue some way. We have a huge national debt that has to get paid off. And at the end of the day, you got to raise revenue in order to pay that off. So I think fundamentally what you're going to see is that the president's going to continue to fight for tariffs. The administration is going to continue to push on tariffs, because right now that is a main significant source of revenue that we need to be bringing in for the country.
Yeah, speaking of that, it's interesting. Those on the right, those conservatives who are somewhat critical of tariffs and their usage, again, they're coming a little bit more sort of from a free trade, free market perspective. They're sort of inclined to support the president when they say that this will be reducing the debt. It's an argument that has been heard, and it's going to be curious to see how this administration makes some of those adjustments, right? They talked about sort of funds back to taxpayers. They talked about reducing the debt. There's sort of many ways that they've explored the usage of the income. The reality is that the income is coming in, and this administration has demonstrated that they're willing to pivot where needed. You did mention immigration, so I do want to go into our topic where we do analyze the current interview that the president did on the topic of H-1B visas. These are high-skilled visas, something that the United States for several years has had and has leveraged. There are critics to the program. There are those who say that it doesn't allow American workers to compete with these individuals who sometimes might take lower wages, and where these businesses, many of them startups in Silicon Valley, but also many times Wall Street, various financial firms do take some of these individuals that, again, come in with these skills in STEM, in science, tech, engineering, and mathematics. But the president has said that there is a need for high-skilled labor in the United States. Chad, again, another pivot from the president. Do you see this as something that maybe he just has been receiving pressure after he had that $100,000 fee, where many companies said that, yes, big places like Amazon and like Tesla can easily pay that fee, but smaller startups who do need the talent and can't necessarily find it in the American people can. Again, do you see this pivot as a maybe pressure that came from that industry, or is this the president kind of just leaning more into what seems to be a battle within the White House? You have sort of your individuals like J.D. Vance, Stephen Miller, who seem a little bit more on the sort of restriction side, but then you have pressures like Elon Musk, Vivek, and even the president himself, who has been pretty open to talent in this space. What's your opinion on this discussion?
Yeah, look, America first is not isolationism. And at the end of the day, we want a country that's going to bring in the best and talented in the United States because we don't want those talented people going to places like communist China, right? And China has a visa program, and they have currently around 300,000 workers in China working on visa programs. And I think from the context, what most people need to realize is that we're only talking about less than a half of 1% of the entire US workforce. So this is a very small percentage of workers. You only have about 500,000 workers who are here in the United States on this H-1B visa program. So this is not a massive program. This is placing millions of Americans from jobs. What we do know is that there have been fraud. We do know there's been abuses, and the president's committed to cleaning that up and fixing it. And I do think that the issues around the fees has been a huge, again, boon to America because we want to incentivize companies to take a second look at American workers and to say, hey, is it better to spend that $100,000 on helping to educate an American worker to get them up to the skill level that maybe we would have from some other individual coming in from a different country? So I think what the president and the administration is doing around this program makes a ton of sense. I do think that some of the critiques are overblown right now. But again, I think that again everyone's pandering, and that's what we see what's going on in the economy. But again, the president right now on this H-1B visa is doing a great job from a substantive point of view.
In this topic, Soledad, there are a lot of myths, there are a lot of facts, there's a lot of history. There are, I think nothing that comes out of the government is necessarily perfect, but there are good things that have come out. I mean, what is your response to those who have been critical about these programs and that have wanted to maybe be a little bit more limited? Tienen razón? Are they right, or are there's more facts behind it?
I'm really glad that you asked that question because what I know is that most Americans know pretty much nothing, including those in government, know nothing about our immigration system. The immigration system is very ineffective. It's not attracting the best and the brightest. It's putting a lot of stones on the way of people who want to do in the United States. It's not working in our favor. And there are a lot of myths surrounding this, particularly with H-1B, which I perfectly know because I used to have an H-1B. So I went through the process of it. It's an absolute lie that it's here to compete with American workers. One, as Chad just said, it's a very, very small pool of people. And second, in order to be accepted as an H-1B worker in the United States, you need to demonstrate that you couldn't, as a company, you couldn't find an American employee with the qualifications that you need for that position. And that's why you are bringing someone who's not from the US. So it's not that simple. It already had a lot of requisites. It already have you need to demonstrate. For example, I used to have an H-1B visa as a journalist in the US, but I couldn't get an H-1B visa as a journalist and just as a journalist because there are thousands of journalists in the US. I had to demonstrate that I was fluent in at least 3 languages, that I could navigate specific issues. For example, in my case, had to do with economics coverage. So it was just not a general assignment reporter. And the company that hired me had to interview at least 10 American candidates that for reasons that they had to report to the immigration system were not a good fit for the position that they had open. And that's when they could open a position for a foreigner like me. That being said, is the system perfect? No, it's not perfect at all. I'm glad that they are paying attention to it, that they are making changes to the system. Is it $100K fee the solution? I don't think that's the right solution, but I think it's a good sign that this administration is paying attention to the current system and it's trying to make changes. I think that the U.S. has to protect Americans 100%, but a way to protect Americans is attracting those who are needed in the country, those who are going to contribute to this country, those who come here for the right reasons. I don't think I'm 1,000,000% in favor of immigration, but I think that immigration should be something that makes sense for Americans. We cannot have like an open border country.
Of course, yeah, there has to be a mutual benefit, right? The immigrant gets to come here, compete in the marketplace, grow towards that American dream, but it has to be
Absolutely.
someone who's a contributing factor to the United States.
But in order for this to happen, it needs to happen in a lawful way. And in order for it to happen in a lawful way, we need to have laws that work.
Yeah, they need to be efficient. Yeah, many of the complaints of the immigration system is that it's not effective. It's not beneficial to the American. It's not beneficial sometimes to the immigrant. And I agree on the border side, right? This is not something an open border. There's laws that need to be in place on how we go about this. Chet, one of the complaints when it does come to this topic, again, was sort of that they compete with American workers. But many times the pushback has been that the American workforce doesn't necessarily go in the area of STEM. I did a little bit of looking into the degrees that people in this space look for. 55 to 60% of foreign-born individuals who come to the United States look for PhDs in STEM. Over 70% of the people who study computer science in the United States are foreign-born. They're not U.S. citizens. That means that it's less than 30% of U.S. citizens who look for degrees in this space. The same thing with AI and ML PhDs. Often when you look at universities, 70 to 80% of the people are foreign-born, and many of it is because U.S. citizens, it's not the areas that they're attracted in. So what the question I want to explore here is, and Donald Trump spoke a little bit about this in his interview, is the need to tackle the root of why maybe many Americans aren't going into these fields. We need to look at sort of everywhere from kindergarten to 12th grade. How do we either create a culture or a system that is preparing American workers? What do you think are the key principles that lawmakers should maybe be looking at to incentivize more Americans going into STEM?
Well, number one, we need more innovation in education. And this is why the president, one of his top agenda items was abolishing the Department of Education. In the United States today, the average American reads on the sixth grade reading level, and certain minority communities in the United States are reading on the fourth grade reading level. It's abysmal. We cannot compete on the global stage in terms of academics because we're just not educating our kids. And so we need to have more innovation. So we need to get it from a top-down approach to more of a bottom-up approach. We see more people homeschooling their kids. In my family, my brother, he's homeschooling his kids because, again, the education system is not working. We need to make some significant changes so that we can compete on the national stage. So having more control at the state level, having more control at the local level in terms of how people are educating the kids, especially in the age of AI and the innovation that we're seeing around that. We need to be leveraging those technologies, virtual reality. We need to be finding the best teachers, the best educators, and being able to get kids more access to those people, increasing broadband, and especially in the rural communities where a lot of Trump supporters are, is going to be critical for this administration to be able to, again, provide access, because that's what it's really about at the end of the day. I mean, America First is about putting Americans first. And what we're not doing right now is putting our kids first with such an abysmal education system.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. There were a lot of folks who had concerns when this administration was making cuts to the Department of Education, but they were very specific that this is about removing bureaucracy. This is about removing empowerment in Washington, D.C., and going to the states to empower them. There are many states, Florida for one, Colorado, Nevada, Oklahoma, Georgia, who have made many reforms in the school choice space where they're allowing parents to have education savings accounts. These are accounts that are tax-free that they can use for their children. They're also doing open enrollment where you're not stuck to your zip code, where you don't have to go to that very specific public school. There's also charter schools, private schools. You mentioned homeschooling, so I think in the space of education, there is a tie to the future workforce. So to that, one more question on this topic of immigration. When it comes to, we're going to talk about 2026 in a minute. There has been polling that shows that when it comes to Latino voters, that there has been some concerns on deportations, on the way the administration has gone forward with this. But I also I was in Nevada not too long ago, and I heard someone say that what they believe is missing from the conversation. They're like, we believe in implementing the current laws on the book, but also fixing the ones that aren't working. Legal immigration, right? We can fix our border, we can have border security, but we have always been a country of immigrants. And you talk here about the importance of the laws and the legal immigration system. What role outside of H-1B should the administration be looking at reforming our legal system? Is there, in your opinion, reforms to ag workers, to just guest worker programs? What role does legal immigration play in this conversation?
Honestly, I think that we need to review our whole immigration system. I think that it's not efficient. I think it's extremely costly, not only for migrants. I think it's extremely costly for the U.S. I think that we have a huge bureaucracy related to our immigration system and that it's not working in our favor. That being said, in particular, things that are quick fixes or low-hanging fruit, temporary workers. Like in a huge chunk of our agricultural industry depends on temporary workers. Those are people that the vast majority of them, when you go and talk to them, they don't want to move to the U.S. They want to come for a season, spend a few months here, working on the fields, and then go back to their country of origin where their family is. It's not their intention to move here. What happens is that they end up, because there's no way for every, I think I don't have the exact number here, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was something around for every 25 applications that agricultural companies do for temporary workers, around they get an answer, not an approval, an answer on one of them. Those are American companies spending dollars in a failed system that it's not working on their favor. People do not want to have to hire undocumented workers, but they cannot find anybody to work out there if it's not those undocumented people. It's as if the country has been incentivizing people coming here, crossing the border, and working without appropriate documentation. I think that we need to fix that as soon as possible. It has to be easy. Also, this is not just only for our economy, but for our safety. We need to know who's coming, who's here, what are they doing, how long they are staying, and when they are going back to their countries of origin. That's how a proper country works. We cannot have all this chaos surrounding immigration. That's low-hanging fruit. H-1Bs, I think it's also low-hanging fruit. The special talent visas, there has been a huge push coming from Silicon Valley about this, because they really need, and this is related to what you were discussing before, we don't have enough people in the fields of engineering, math, AI. We need to bring talent from abroad. Why are we not doing that?
56% of unicorn startups were started by immigrants or co-founded by agreements. On the space of agriculture, it's very interesting because I again want to talk about some of those myths. Folks do say, well, Americans should be doing this job, right? They talk about people who are on certain benefits, or they're receiving funds from the government. But it's important to understand that, one, a lot of these jobs are seasonal. There'll be a season of 2-3 months, let's say in California. Then folks will move to Washington State for apple picking season. Nebraska also has their season. So it does require folks. Imagine an American family who says, I'm willing to do that kind of work. I'm just not willing to move my kids from school to school every 3 months to a different state. So it's not just, I think, in quotation marks, a laziness problem from some American workers. It's just the type of work that they're just not willing to move. They have families, they have communities, they're part of churches. And I remember the Bracero program, 1950s, 1960s, if I'm not mistaken. It was a program where people, specifically from Mexico, could come in temporarily, work for that season, and then they would go back. And that's what families did. They didn't want, or workers, they didn't want to stay in the United States. They were able to work, make good money, go back to their communities, go back to their homes. What happened when they got rid of, because the left started bringing in the topic of unions and started bringing in essentially poison pills to these programs, when they cut them off, what people did is they just started staying in the United States unlawfully. So I think on the conversation of immigration, it's going to be important that this administration doesn't just get it right for the economy, But also when it comes to elections, people are looking at our immigration system.
100%. Another low-hanging fruit when it comes to immigration has to do with rural doctors. There's a huge need in the United States for doctors, trained doctors in rural areas, and they are not finding American doctors to do that. Like it's you can put it however you want. The fact is that there's a lack of doctors in rural areas and they cannot find enough professionals to go to these areas. There's a law that helps with that. There's a law that allows people to bring doctors from abroad with every single qualification. I'm not saying that they don't have to take exams here. We need to prove that these are well-trained doctors. We need to prove that they are ready to work in the American system. But there's a law that allows them to do that, and we are not implementing it.
Yeah, and there are limitations to it.
Yeah.
I do want to turn over now to the GOP's affordability test. Will they deliver on this? The government shutdown is over. It was a historic 41 days or so. During that government shutdown, we did have elections in New York, New Jersey, and Virginia. These are all Democrat strongholds where Democrats did win, but many people are looking at the margin of victory and saying that Democrats did very well. There's one buzzword that came out of those elections. It was the term or the topic of affordability. Now with the government reopened, people are looking at the White House. They're looking at the GOP-led House and the GOP-led Senate. And folks are going to be saying, what are you doing on the topic of affordability? Chet, what do you think is the top priorities of the GOP House and the GOP Senate? What should they be focusing on in these last 2 months, really a month and a half before 2026? How do they deliver on some of the promises they made?
Well, I think the first thing we've seen is the president focusing on food, and that's really important. The second thing is going to be on energy. And the president's big push was to say they wanted to lower energy prices by 50%. And so what you see is the president's delivered on lowering overall energy prices. Fuel is down. However, electricity prices are up. And what we're seeing electricity prices across the country generally on average being up because it's being driven by AI. You have the greater adoption of EVs and electrification of so many things. And so what the president has to be doing is, quite frankly, making up with the solar and the wind industry, because those are the only two industries immediately that you could deploy more electricity to be able to meet demand. Because as demand increases and if you don't have more electricity, prices are going to go up. So what we've seen across the board from organizations like the Alliance to Save Energy, from the Clean Energy Buyers Association, they've done studies on this and shown that we need more energy efficiency. We need more renewables to be deployed on the grid. I know that sometimes for many conservatives that's a bad word, but that's just the reality of what we're facing as a country, is that we need as many electrons on the grid as possible to help lower the cost for the average everyday consumer in terms of electricity bills, because that's what's really going to be a major driver in terms of people trading off between paying their electricity bills and paying for food. That causes huge problems and it's going to be a huge issue in the midterms. So we got to get prices down, and that's going to be critical as we roll into 2026.
Yeah, and energy is critical for, everyday consumers and families, but also for small and large companies on the topic of AI and how major corporations are leaning into AI systems. Data centers are essential, and data centers require an immense amount of energy. So these folks are looking for affordability, but you also mentioned the grid. Will the grid be able to essentially sustain and provide all the energy in that space? The administration and many members of Congress have talked about energy permitting reform and about the bureaucracy system and how many times, again, our government has been the one getting in the way of being able to drive down these prices. So I think it's going to be an important one that they tackle. Soledad, on the topic, what's your opinion? How is this GOP going to tackle the topic of health care? During the shutdown, Democrats talked about the Obamacare subsidies. They're going to expire in December. Republicans have historically said that Obamacare is not the right system. What is sort of the GOP plan in this space? Are they going to be able just to kind of sidestep healthcare? Are they going to have to lean into it? Are there solutions being floated? What is the strategy in this space?
I'm going to answer to you what I would like to see happening. Unfortunately, I'm not sure it's what's going to happen. I think that this administration and the fact that they have a majority in Congress has a historical opportunity to tackle a severe problem that we have, which is our healthcare system and Obamacare that haven't been the solution. We've been talking about this for over a decade now. The problem is that we don't have a plan that works better. And I don't say this meaning, oh, we need to leave Obamacare there. No. What I mean is, like, we need to sit down, our representatives in Congress need to sit down, do their job, and find a solution, come up with a better plan. We cannot keep doing politics surrounding this. I think that that would be a huge historical win for the Republican Party, for this administration in particular, if after so many years of political debate, they do their job, they sit down, and they come up with a better solution. We are the country that spends the most in the world on healthcare, and we have really poor healthcare system. Most of our people do not have access to a decent healthcare system, and we are spending billions of dollars every year. This evidently doesn't work. We need to find a solution.
Yeah, there have been, I think, like you said, there hasn't been a concrete replacement plan
No.
for Obamacare. The reason
There
I
has been
think,
a lot of political debate, but no concrete solutions. And I think that people would really value if this pragmatism that it's part of the president's personality, in a way to say it, this pragmatism comes to this. Instead of political debate, let's have solutions.
yeah, I think that's something that the GOP in the Senate is going to have to focus on because, Chet, as we know, the Senate, many of the seats that are up are in conservative-leaning states. A lot of these are, again, kind of in the center, but many Republicans are essentially going to be on defense when it comes to their seats. But same thing, the House. The House will obviously want to keep their majority, but they're going to have to present their agenda. President Trump will not be on the ballot in 2026 physically, right? So sort of that drive that many people took advantage of with the president on the ballot, they won't have in this coming year. Earlier, you did mention sort of minority voters. I think you brought it up in the term of education, and then early on affordability. Minorities did help raise the numbers of the margin of victory for the president. Latino voters historically came out in areas like the Rio Grande Valley, in places like Florida, in places like North Carolina, Georgia, even in Pennsylvania. But we did see again, also gains among black voters. When you think of minority voters in 2026, how should Congress be thinking their approach? What are the strategies? What are the messages? And what is the efforts of engagement that they should be having through these coalitions? Because I think many times you can't get overconfident. Yes, you made gains in 2024. That doesn't automatically mean these folks are 100% with you for the next election.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, Republicans need to throw away the playbook, as well as Democrats, in terms of the traditional ideas. Because as we've seen in this election cycles in 2024, you had people voting for Donald Trump and AOC, right? It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Crossover vote.
But the reality of what we saw is that it was a populist message, and that's what people are really relating to. And what Democrats are realizing is that they need to do something different because they are completely out of power and they're struggling. And Republicans need to also realize that they're not technically in power. Donald Trump's in power. People voted for Donald Trump as president of the United States, but that coalition is not going to stand behind a JD Vance or any other candidate that comes into place because they're not Donald Trump. And so what Republicans really need to be spending a lot of time doing in 2026, and really, quite frankly, starting now, is to build a new coalition of voters that they can rely on that's going to show up. And so you need to start thinking about, especially Latino voters, as they're becoming a huge voting bloc across the United States, but also other minority groups, and figuring out how you have a appealing message to those groups that are really going to energize the base and get them to come out and to vote, and not to vote for the couch and just sit at home.
Yeah, that's a big and important point because I think many folks have focused on sort of what they say as infighting within the Democrat Party, most recently with infighting people criticizing Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. But even before that, is it Governor Newsom who's the leader of the party? Is it a Mondami who's gone very far to the left of historically where Democrats have been? But the truth is, on the Republican side, while they have a clear leader right now, they need to make sure that they are thinking through what does sort of life after Donald Trump look like. And that, to me, means 2026. Although he's still around, he's still a leader. Yeah, he's not on the ballot. He won't be on the ballot in 4 years or in 3 years when he's leaving the presidency. So it's something that the GOP has to be paying attention to that now. Well, I do want to thank both of you guys, Chet Love, for joining us from Washington, D.C., Soledad Cedro here in Miami, and thanks to our audience who tuned in today. Again, this has been The Game, the show where we go play-by-play, analyzing the game of politics.